What's up, Kirby players? My name's Inferno, and welcome to the Inferno dimension. Today we're going to be talking all about the future of Kirby. As you all probably know, we recently got our first taste of a real 3D Kirby game with Kirby and the Forgotten Land, so we'll be talking about that and where I think the series could go next. Are we going to get a direct sequel, some DLC, or something completely different? Yeah, I'd like that, please. But whatever it is, we're here to talk about it. So let's start with the game that changed everything. It's a bit dramatic.
Kirby and the Forgotten Land. Now I'm not here to give you my full review, but I do want to talk about this game for a bit, what it does right, what it does wrong, and where I think the series could go from here. In terms of a translation from 2D to 3D, this game is pretty spot on, with the movement and level design translating smoothly from the previous games. The level design itself in this game is amazing, in terms of graphic design and the fun to be had in them. There are a lot of different things within these levels, whether it be puzzles, action segments, or different types of gameplay you can get when you use mouthful mode, like the car, roller coaster, the arch, or plenty of others. While the level design is very fun and functional, there was a big sacrifice made to keep the levels working as intended, and this is where we get to the first problem I have with this game. Kirby's flight limit. If you've played this game, you already know what I'm talking about. In almost every Kirby game before this, Kirby had almost unrestricted flight, but in this game there's a constant invisible ceiling to your flight not far from the ground. This makes flying feel very restrictive, and the worst part is that it's barely necessary. I can only think of a few parts of the game that just wouldn't work if you were given unlimited or even slightly less limited flight. I get that having unlimited flight would probably make this game too easy, so why not do something like Smash Bros where you run out of flight quickly instead of adding this completely arbitrary ceiling to your flight. At the very least, this game could allow you to fly uncapped in the hub town. I don't know why it's necessary to do it there where there's no obstacles anyway. This game is so close to feeling amazing to move around in, but the flight ceiling just gets on your nerves for the whole game, and it's a serious problem when one of your character's movement options feels this restrictive. I hope in future 3D Kirby games the devs can work around this problem in a much more subtle way. How it's done in this game technically works, but the fact that I can't go from the ground here to this ledge without taking a staircase when this is a Kirby game is just so frustrating. This problem doesn't really impact the gameplay itself too much because this game doesn't have many vertical segments, which I think future games should have more of, but it's largely a problem you can ignore. It's just irritating. The other big problem I have with this game does actually hurt the experience compared to previous Kirby games, at least in my opinion, and that problem is the way copy abilities are handled in this game. Let's go over them real quick. You've got 12 copy abilities. This is already the least of any Kirby game since Kirby's Dream Land 3 for the SNES, but it gets better because 2 of these aren't even real abilities. They're single use and one of them is sleep, which is ridiculous that sleep is almost 10% of this game's abilities. But anyways, of the real abilities, 2 are new and 8 are from old games. The new ones you get are Ranger and Drill. Now Ranger is an awesome and versatile ability, but Drill is pretty lame, at least in my opinion. It does take advantage of the 3D nature of this game, but it's pretty much a worse version of Animal Kirby. I have no idea why they didn't just bring that back, especially when this game's villain team is animal themed. But anyway, the other abilities are far from the most interesting choices they could have brought back. The only 2 that were surprises were Tornado and Needle. Certainly nice to have back, especially Tornado, which is my favorite copy ability of all time, but this just isn't enough. It's extra stupid because they also programmed the Spear ability in, and it could have been given to Kirby, but only player 2 can ever use it. Screw you, solo players! But what I've neglected to mention so far is the ability upgrading system. This allows you to get more and more powerful as you go, finding ability scrolls and then using rare stones to upgrade them, and each ability has about 2 to 3 versions to pick from. And this is where I might lose some of you because although I see the merits in it, I don't like the upgrade system. Let me explain. The upgrades were obviously meant to give the player a feeling of growing more and more powerful, and it does, but the way this game sacrifices having a diverse selection of abilities for that purpose just doesn't work for me. In old Kirby games you had a lot of options, and they were all fairly balanced, but in this game I only ever played Ranger, Tornado, Cutter, and maybe Sword and Needle a few times, and I barely touched the other abilities, and I imagine most of you had a similar experience, but maybe with different abilities. Old games give you more choices, and I'd say better choices. In my opinion, the ability upgrading was not worth sacrificing having a decent amount of abilities, especially when the abilities that did return were mostly the most basic and uninteresting ones.
If any of you are returning viewers, you've probably seen my video where I predicted what abilities would come back for Kirby and the Forgotten Land. So this total lack of abilities was very disappointing, especially because there's so many amazing abilities that could have been brought back. Even though those predictions were wrong, I still think it holds up as a good analysis of what abilities could and should be brought back in a future 3D Kirby game. So, if you want to hear more about which abilities I think would be great to have back in the future, check out that video, why not?
Now, it may seem like I hate this game after all that complaining, but I absolutely don't. While those issues are there, it's still easily a 9 out of 10 game and the best game of the year so far, and I have more good things to say about it. The levels are an absolute joy, and Hubtown is an amazing feature with lots of awesome minigames, including the arena, which is a nice inclusion from previous games' boss rush modes. The Treasure Road levels where you have to complete a specific task as one ability are awesome and really challenge you. The story is also great and very cinematic, with amazing cutscenes and with this game having amazing music throughout. I also love how there are difficulty options, but I would really like it if there was a super hard mode just to absolutely ruin my day and make me cry, you know? Overall, great game with a few areas I think could be improved.
So, with all that said, what's next? Well, while I'm not sure if this game will have DLC, it's definitely a possibility that we should consider, as a lot of Nintendo's other biggest games often do get extra paid content down the line. So what kind of DLC could this game get, if it does get any? Let's speculate.
When it comes to DLC in a game like this, I think it would make most sense to compare it to other 3D platforming games from Nintendo. Super Mario Odyssey didn't get any DLC, which may point to this game not getting any either, but something else this game could be compared against is Super Mario 3D World. Now, I hear what you're saying. That game didn't get any DLC. Well, you may be technically right, but you're wrong. Bowser's Fury is a good example of a direction this game could take with DLC. Something mechanically quite different that shows how this game could be reworked for unique gameplay, and we might get something like this for Kirby. While this game could just get a basic edition of a few stages as DLC, I think we're more likely to get a whole different gameplay mode or something different entirely. But what could that be? Here's a few ideas I have. To start, we could get something like the free content updates that Star Allies got, where there's a new campaign with some unique mechanics and new stages. We could also get an extension to the Treasure Road stages and hub minigames. Maybe they'd even pull a Luigi's Mansion and add multiplayer games as a DLC. Something more likely is that we get a side game mode that experiments with a more open 3D stage, in the way that Bowser's Fury did the same thing for Super Mario 3D World. Some things we may get if that's the case are camera control, a seamless open world, and better movement options, all things that made Bowser's Fury different from 3D World. There's actually precedent for the Kirby devs doing experiments in the form of small games or projects like this, such as Kirby's Blowout Blast, which was a 3DS game where you played Kirby in a 3D environment. Although not nearly as impressive or ambitious as Forgotten Land, it didn't even have copy abilities, it is somewhat of a predecessor to it. So I think it's possible we could get a Bowser's Fury type experimental new open world as a DLC. However, I've got one more idea I want to share with you, and I think this is the best possible DLC idea. There's one particular game mode in a previous Kirby game that I think would be amazing to see come back and would take total advantage of an interesting 3D environment. That's right, I'm talking about the Great Cave Offensive. If you're a 90s or 2000s kid who grew up with Kirby Superstar or Kirby Superstar Ultra, I imagine those four words bring you just as much nostalgia as me, especially the Great Cave and Offensive part. Now, I've always loved this game mode in Kirby Superstar, Ultra in my case. In fact, it's probably my favorite thing in the entire franchise. It's my favorite part of my favorite Kirby game, and what makes it so good is the amazing stage designing and the collectibles.
Oh, hell yeah, I got the Falcon helmet.
The Great Cave Offensive, for anyone unfamiliar, is one of the many campaigns in Kirby Superstar where you explore a few wide-open side-scrolling expanses and collect treasures along the way. If you've never played a classic Kirby game, I totally recommend getting Superstar Ultra for the DS and trying out this mode. There's just something about finding each and every one of these hidden chests throughout the levels and watching your money rise that's just magical, and some of the treasure chests are very cleverly hidden. Now, how this could translate to a 3D open space is obvious. You could make the exact same kind of world full of treasure, except this time with amazing graphics and 3D open spaces with multiple areas to scavenge to find these chests. There'd be many ways to hide things. You could have crazy structures and interesting puzzles. Maybe it could even be non-linear, but that's not even necessary. A 3D Great Cave Offensive would be an amazing idea no matter how it would be done. Now I will say this is a bit of a pipe dream of mine, and not very likely. The amount of time and effort it would take to translate this concept to 3D would probably be too much for a DLC, and I doubt an idea like this would be a priority for the Kirby devs. But I've been dreaming of a Great Cave Offensive sequel ever since I was a little baby kid, and I think it's a genuinely good idea. Who knows, maybe they could take this concept and use it as a new collectible system for an entirely new Kirby game.
Well, that's all I've got to say about DLCs, but there might not even be a DLC, and some of those ideas I discussed could instead be used for a sequel to Forgotten Land, so let's talk about that.
There's a few different paths Kirby could take when it comes to its next big game. I think it's a given that it'll be a 3D game. 2D Kirby is probably going to have a bit of a hiatus while Kirby takes root as a 3D franchise, so let's ignore the possibility of the next Kirby game being Kirby Superstar Allies 2, and focus on something that would continue what Forgotten Land did for the series. But just being a 3D game doesn't tell us everything. It could be 3D like Super Mario Odyssey, 3D like Super Mario World, or 3D like Dark Souls. Probably not that last one, although Kirby is the type to inhale a lot of souls, if you know what I mean. A new 3D Kirby game could be totally open world like Breath of the Wild, but I kinda doubt that. Something more like Super Mario Odyssey would be more likely. And that's if the next Kirby game isn't just another linear platformer like Forgotten Land. If we do get another Forgotten Land, then I hope we get some of the stuff I recommended earlier, like removing the flight ceiling, getting more interesting copy abilities, and having more open-ended and also vertical segments in the game. I'd also love to see some interesting new environments out of a new Kirby game. The abandoned city theme was executed amazingly in Forgotten Land, and I'd love to see what kinds of world design the next Kirby game will have. No matter what happens though, it's likely that we're going to get another fully fledged 3D adventure campaign within the next few years, which is awesome. Whether or not it's open world, and whether or not it fixes any of the problems I have with Forgotten Land, I'll be very happy to get the new 3D Kirby adventure. The prospect of a new Kirby game is even more interesting when you consider the fact that it will likely be on Nintendo's next big console, with graphical and performance upgrades as well. So in conclusion, I'm excited!
Well, that's all I have to say about the near future of Kirby. I thought about making a segment about spin-offs and what we could get with those, but then I remembered, oh yeah, the only spin-offs we get anymore are fighting games. Jeez, why don't they just make Canvas Curse 3? But that's all I have to say. I imagine this is the last time I'll be making a video on new Kirby stuff for a bit, so if you want some videos on other Kirby or Nintendo stuff, like and share, tell your neighbor about it, leave a comment, send this video to your landlord and or tenant, and subscribe for more. See ya!